a lot of the issues, the pressures that the ocean is under, that I think most of the modernized and privileged world is talking about, we tend to believe it's somewhere else. It's not in our own backyard.
Off-Gassing, a scuba podcast with host Nick Hogel. Growing up, Helene-Julie Zofia Paaman has always been an ocean lover. It would be on the island of Koh Tao where she would take her first breaths underwater, but she was not the biggest fan. Years later, she found herself slowly falling in love with the sport and eventually becoming an instructor while spending time in Egypt. Eventually making her way back to Denmark, she would take up underwater photography as a way to share stories and, most of all, information. Highlighting how local changes can make a big difference, she has become an underwater ambassador. Please enjoy. Helen, welcome to the podcast today. I'm excited to have you on. I'm excited to hear your story. How are you doing? It's this morning for you, correct?
Yes, I just had breakfast. I am in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Okay. What was for breakfast this morning?
It was oats.
Okay. Are you a big fan of oats?
Yeah, actually I am a big fan of oats. We grow them here in Denmark. I can get them organic and they're cheap.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember the last time that I've had oats. It's been a while. I know I usually feel like when I kind of get on my healthy kick, I'll incorporate more oats because they're cheaper. I know they're healthy and they're filling too, which is really nice because you can eat a bowl of it and stay full for quite a while.
That's it.
Well, awesome. So I'll jump right in and I'll ask my first question I always like to ask is, tell me how and why you became scuba certified. Tell me about that first breath underwater, that first experience. Was it absolutely amazing? Was it, I absolutely hate this? Was it, this is okay? Tell me all about it.
So I think I'll just jump into the how rather than the why, because I don't remember the why anymore. The closest I can get to that is that I've always been an animal and ocean lover. But I was like most Danes, like take a year at some point and go traveling. I just did it in a summer break. It was not a full year, but I went 2 months to Thailand. And a friend of mine that had already been to the East had done an open water certificate, and she said, I'm going to meet you up in Thailand halfway, and we're going to go dive together. And I'm like, yeah, cool. At that point in my life, I don't think I'd ever tried anything that I couldn't complete. You know, I was still pretty young and everything went fairly easy. And I started with an open water course that was in Koh Tao at the time in Thailand. You completed all the theory before you even, have any equipment in your hands. Complete all the theory, and then you go in the water, and I absolutely hated it. It was noisy, it was weird. I got water up my nose. Everything was moving. I remember there's quite a wavy day, but maybe I'm exaggerating. We were sitting there just to do the initial exercises, and there was no pool, so you do it in the ocean, which is actually a teaching preference I have myself today. But at that time, it was a big step from just sitting reading the theory and then sitting there. And I couldn't even just take the second stage out of my mouth and put it back in that whole first time in the water. So basically, I couldn't do any exercises without panicking. I got past that one on the second try in the water, and then the mask skill killed me. And at the end of the day, the instructor took me to the side and said, well, we have a student from last week as well. She has the same problems. We'll take you two aside. We were a full class, eight students. We'll take you aside and we'll give you a day to try these things out. And I never succeeded. So it never really happened. I remember taking all the gear off after saying it's not going to happen and just jumping in the water, going free diving and enjoying that so much more. So yeah, so that was a little bit of a bummer, and it never really left me. I thought about it for years to come, and other circumstances then made it so that I ended up in Egypt. That was in 2007. I wanted to do actually a full year of traveling the Middle East. I had friends in Egypt, so I thought I'll start my travel soft and visit them first. And that was then in Sharm el-Sheikh in Sinai. I got a little bit stuck there because as soon as they heard there was... So the expat community there is quite small, or was quite small. And they heard there was an unemployed Dane there. And there was a dive center that had just signed a big contract with a Danish tour operator. And they needed Danish speaking, or they preferred to have a Danish speaking in the reception. And then I talked to the boss, and he was like, "Oh, you also speak German?" Because we learned that in school here, and it was a German dive center. So they were like, "Yeah, come work for us. And then while you're here for a year, we'll get you certified, even up to instructor if you want." And I'm like, dude, this is not going to happen. I tried diving. I am a disaster. But I thought, why not? This was not at all what I had planned for, but why not try it out? Started working there. It took me quite a while to take the first leap and say to an instructor, let's go diving again. But I think because I was in the environment and getting much more familiarized with all the processes around diving, all the operations, I was a lot more comfortable, and it all went without problems, really. So, okay. I mean, not without problems. I still struggled like most people do, but it was much more smooth. And I was also maybe knowing a little bit more why I was doing it. So now we come back to the why, I'm in this operation. I got this amazing opportunity, and I have this nagging feeling that there was a thing I didn't accomplish earlier in life. So yeah, little by little, I became dive master. And then I guided dives there for about half a year. And then I also did my instructor course there.
So just a real quick question, because I don't know if it makes sense. I don't know if I've heard it before, but so is a nickname for Danish people Danes? Is that, did I hear that correctly?
Maybe it's my English that's wrong, but I thought that is what you call us.
Oh, no.
Take the people, we are Danes. When you're from Denmark, you are a Dane.
Oh, okay. No, I've never heard that before. I'm bad as far as, just stereotypical American, bad as far as geography terms and what people are called, or nicknames. I know like certain nicknames for states and stuff, but no, I'd never heard that before, so I was just curious. So when you went around Thailand, I'm curious, besides Koh Tao, what other destinations did you go to in Thailand?
I have to see if I remember that trip fully. The thing is, I actually studied engineering, and during those studies, I did an exchange program with the university in Bangkok. So I was in Bangkok. That was the first time I went to Thailand. I was in Bangkok living at the university for 5 weeks. And after that week, I went just 1 week down to Koh Tao to do the full moon party. And then that is why, yeah, but it was very different back then. Very, very chilled. Very chill. Because I've been back and I'm like, whoa, what is going on?
Yeah. They've evolved partying, that is for sure.
So I think this trip I went back just to be a tourist, really, because at that time I had mostly been in Bangkok and done that one party, and I thought there must be more to it. So I went back and I was briefly in Koh Samui, hated that. Then I was back in Koh Phangan. I was up north. So you have Chiang Mai, and then you have even something further up, Pai. Was super, super tiny at the time, like really 2 roads crossing. And yeah, I went there. I've been also visiting family on the far, far east, almost to the border of what was Burma at the time. But that was a non-touristic place. I don't even remember the name of the village anymore. I rented a bike there. I don't know how I managed with no English and no Thai and no nothing. That was my first bike crash.
Okay.
Imagine I handed over my passport as a deposit for the bike. I wanted to bike around the mountains a bit. And then I hand over my passport, and like 2 minutes after, the guy here is like crash. And I went straight into a wall. Yeah,
That's
we
funny.
sorted that out as well. But yeah, I've seen quite a few, but I've never been to. So a lot of people now, they go back to Thailand. They go to the to the Eastern Bay there, to some of those islands. I've never been to those. I've been diving there now. Eventually.
Yeah, it's funny because so I know I've been to a lot of different places. So I'm half Thai. My mother is from Thailand. There's a lot of places that I think that I haven't been, and then my mother will be like, "Yeah, because I lived there. I went to school there for about a year and a half when I was just preschool, like very very young, like 4 or 5, 6 years of age." And she'll be like, "Yeah, we went there. We spent time there." Because it's funny, I have no memory, so I don't think that I've been to Koh Tao, which is really funny because so many people go there. Like people go to Thailand, like Koh Tao is one of the places that you go. And it was funny because like when I was in my early 30s, I took a trip back there with my mom. I hadn't been back there in a long time, and I was like, "Mom, I'm coming out here next year for a month," and that was my first scuba experience. But it was really funny because we were there in the 80s, and I was telling her, I was like, "Hey, I'm gonna go to this island called Fifi Island," and she's like, "Oh, PP Island." She's like, "Why would you ever go there? There's nothing there." And I'm like, I'm like, "Are you sure?" Because it's grown so much, So it's so funny because her memory of Thailand is so completely different than what Thailand is today. Kind of like what you're saying with the full moon parties. I'm sure they've just evolved from, the last 20. I've never personally been to one. I've obviously heard about them, but it's funny. I'll have to go and visit Koh Tao one day, but currently to date, I have not been to Koh Tao. So.
Yeah, but even I think between my two first visits it was just a few months. Things happened there, and then a few years passed. A lot happened, and then I think my final trip, I don't remember, but then 13 or 15 years had gone. It was a shock. It was a complete shock. So different. But Bangkok to me is the same, and I absolutely love it. It's my favorite. I actually don't like cities, but if I should name a favorite city, it's Bangkok.
Okay, we have it there on the recording now. It's official.
Yes.
So I'm actually back to the diving. I'm curious. So the skills that got you at the beginning in Thailand, the mask skill, when you were going back to get that certification to try it again, how was that? Were you nervous going into it? Were you able to get some practice or anything?
I was, of course, very, very nervous. Also, I think I didn't have any expectations. I just, I was surrounded by instructors that was just, producing certified divers every day. And they were very, very keen to see if, I just hadn't found the right way through it. And I think a lot of the conversations up until the dives helped a lot. I think being surrounded, being in the environment, they also had so many tips to how to get through a skill. There is the demonstration part, and you can copy that. You can just copy the movements. And I think for a lot of students, like for the majority, that is what they do. They just copy, and then it works. And then there are those odd ones at the end of the scales, like me, that need a lot better understanding of what will I then feel when it happens, and how can I then deal with that emotion or that physical reaction that comes with it. So with all those little tips and tricks that got me through it, I also practiced a lot more. I spent a lot more time in the water. My dive master instructor, she said, you need to be in the water every day. You don't need to dive, you just need to be in the water. And I felt up until that point that I was quite comfortable in the water, but it's also how you move, how you respond to the water getting in and everywhere and splashing your face when it wasn't planned. And yeah, I don't know. It was just very, very lucky circumstances that I could do it that way around. Also, coming from Denmark, I think a lot of Danes or Danish people, I think a lot of feel they are super hardcore. They've done the course here. which I also agree with. I think I couldn't have done that. That would not have been my path.
I can't remember. I was speaking to somebody the other day about mistakes and challenging moments throughout their learning curve, right? Like them being students. And then when they go on to become an instructor, it's actually such a valuable tool, don't you think? Because of the fact that now, like, you can put yourself in that student's shoes, as opposed to if you just did the skill and you never had a problem with it, you might not understand it as much. Because you as an instructor now, like when you're teaching that skill, I'm sure that kind of has to, you know what that student is going through more, don't you think?
Absolutely. And also I became the instructor that took all the problematic students. That's not very kind to call them that, but the ones that didn't fall into the common group that had issues. And it doesn't need to be the mask. It can be anything. Even people that get past, because I think some students also get past the discomfort of the skills in the beginning, and then they hit a wall later on in the course. And the walls you hit later in the course with buoyancy or with awareness or with doing proper checks is maybe sometimes a little bit overlooked. Because if they're not dying, then it's fine, it's good. They can clear the mask, we can continue the course. But to become a real good diver is also, it's also the right mindset and, remembering the full set of core skills that you learn from the beginning, right? So I have also sometimes just had students with those kind of issues later on. I see myself as someone who can create a learning environment that sort of fits everyone. But then you also need time, and that doesn't always fit into the scope of holiday diving.
When you went from, because it's a question that I always like to ask, is going from, I feel like, obviously the dive master stage is the first professional stage. I always like to tell people, when you hit that rescue stage, it changes the way that you think as a diver. You kind of start looking at other divers, not judging them, that's not the right word, but you're kind of, you're look it becomes more than about yourself at that point, right? You're kind of just looking, making sure there's no situations. How did you find going from, the fun recreational to the actual teaching side, the professional? Now I'm a leader that everyone's looking up to. How did you find that transition? It seems like you liked it quite a bit.
I think diving was always a professional job of mine because I was working in a dive center and the people I was diving with were professionals. So I think, though of course I did do a few fun dives here and there, I was either there to learn or to help out in some way, because I would also, I would get all that diving sort of for free, but then, if I can help out, then it's not a day off. So I was almost in it from the beginning. And the real transition didn't happen till much, much later. The real transition is, you look back, because admittedly it all went a little bit fast as well, didn't it? I mean, from my first dive and until I was instructor was 1.5 years. So what, maybe 2 years later, I look back at it and say, wow, because now I've been in all those situations where I had to put my skills into use. Because learning something, you never really, or I really never know if I will also be able to take those skills out of the bag when I need them. And once you've had the experience and been in real, actual life situations with problems with panicking divers, with divers passing out, real rescue situations, dangerous logistics on the water, bad communications between colleagues that turns into, everything hits the fan at one time. I think that's where the transition really, really hit me. And I started taking all the responsibility that I knew I had on paper. I started to take that super serious.
It is scary, and I remember going through like the EFR class or the rescue class, going through rescue scenarios. You're learning these skills or teaching them, and you're kind of like, hey, I want you to have this skill set, but hopefully you'll never have to use it, right? And And it is kind of, I guess, yeah, you don't know how it's gonna how you're gonna handle it until the actual situation arises, which is tough for everybody because definitely, you can. I mean, obviously you want to keep practicing, but at the same time, it's just like when, the shit hits the fan, then it's like, okay, this is a whole different scenario.
And it was all scenarios because in the beginning I didn't have my own experiences that I could pull from. So I totally understand that there must be, if you have been doing recreational diving for fun yourself for a few years before you take that leap, I understand that's a big transition. But for me, it was the acknowledgement after actually having had the bigger responsibility for a few years, realizing, wow.
Can you tell me a little bit about Underwater Ambassador?
Yes, so Underwater Ambassador is a title I gave myself. I think it was in 2017. So fast forward 10 years from my first dive. After being an instructor full-time for 3.5 years, I returned to Denmark and I started actually to dive for myself for the first time. And finally, I also managed to dive here in Denmark and dive in the close proximity of where I live. And I realized that a lot of the issues, the pressures that the ocean is under, that I think most of the modernized and privileged world is talking about, we tend to believe it's somewhere else. It's not in our own backyard. And what I realized diving close by is that the problems with plastic pollution, the problems with growing temperatures in the water, the problems with habitat loss, with fauna loss is right outside my door. And sometimes when we talk about something we saw on a holiday which looked really, really bad, I can tell you it's twice as bad here. And I thought, nobody is talking about this because they don't know. And I decided I needed to communicate these things. During those years, I also borrowed cameras from a lot of guests here and there, so whenever a guest took a break from a dive, I would borrow a camera, and I had gotten a big interest for underwater photography. So I thought with my photography, I can tell everyone that story, not just divers, but also people who are not able to go underwater and see what I see. So that's the concept of Underwater Ambassador.
What do you shoot on now?
I have now a Canon 5D Mark IV that I got about the same time as I started the little Underwater Ambassador concept business. It's not really a business, is it? But it's a concept. I had a little point-and shoot from Olympus for a few years before that, but then for some stories, for some photos, it had sort of met its boundaries. I couldn't get any further with that camera, and then I made a 5-year plan, a saving plan. Started with the camera housing and one lens, and the underwater housing, and then slowly got more lenses, domes, flashes and everything. And within 5 years, I have the full setup now, like from macro to wide angle. And yeah, it's 7 years going now, that camera. So that's really good.
Awesome. What is your preferred? What do you like to shoot mostly? Macro, wide lens?
I think macro in the beginning, but that could also just be the environment I was in. But also it's a little bit easier. I mean, if you have a very controlled buoyancy, macro becomes quite easy because often the objects don't move. So I think a lot of people start there. But now it's wide angle. Because I think wide angle is easier for the non-divers to understand. They get more of a full-scale frame. Whenever I can get a human being in the photo as well, so I can connect the top life world with the underwater world, I like to do that. Or use split shots as well, which is also a wide angle shot, right? Where you see part of the land environment and the underwater environment. So you tie those two worlds together.
I always like to ask photographers this. Is every dive, are you bringing the camera? And then when you don't bring it, is it like weird when you don't have your camera when you're in the water?
I know a lot of photographers will bring the camera on every dive. And if not, they have a GoPro and they at least have that. I've been there as well because I was addicted to getting the shots, and I was greedy as well. Things didn't happen if I didn't have a photo, or if somebody else had a photo, I got super annoyed. And then I had an experience. Then I had an experience in South Africa where really my greed became so obvious that I became appalled by myself. I was doing the sardine run for the third consecutive year. The sardine run is a huge migration of sardines that comes with the cold currents along the east coast of South Africa, and brings a lot of nutrients as well with that cold currents. You have the sardines, so it's a huge migration of wildlife that come together. You have dolphins, you have gannets from the sky, you have a lot of different shark species. At the same time, have the humpback whale migrating north to the warmer waters at Mozambique to give birth or to mate. So it's like an amazing migration of animals, and you never know what's going to happen. We are on the water. It was a very, very quiet day. We hear the known, like, we know there's a whale, and then we all turn our heads, and it's not just a whale, it's an orca. It's actually two female orcas. Orcas are very different depending on area, but the ones in South Africa, they are known to eat baby white sharks, white shark babies. So it's a little bit different to swimming with an orca, for instance, in the Arctic, where they eat herring. Just in the mindset. Maybe it's not different really, but in the mindset of what sort of a predator you're in the water with, it's a little bit different. We test them out. We go in the water. They're super curious, and they interact, and they show their bellies. And I had my camera setting on manual focus because I had been shooting some night shots the previous evening. So I really couldn't photograph them at all. And they were in my face. And I have no proper photos because when the camera is on manual, and that's something I can only change on the camera lens before I put it in the housing. That's the only thing I don't have control over on the underwater housing itself. The way I've set my camera, it just won't shoot unless it has focus. So I just rejected to shoot. On the boat, I'm sitting like a little 3-year-old crying because I didn't get a photo, rather than celebrating that I was swimming with two female orcas that actually wanted my attention, that showed their bellies, that returned, that were, curious to have us in the water. And my focus was just in the complete wrong place. So that was a little bit of a wake-up call, and since then I am still also a photographer, but I'm somebody who wants underwater interactions. So I'm first a diver, and then I'm second a photographer. So it's completely all right not to have the camera with me in the water. I do that quite often. Or if I can also do full dives, just having it hanging.
I always tell people like, I do the dry photography, not in water photography. It's just a hobby. Like I like most of my hobbies, I would consider it an aggressive hobby, like scuba diving, a very aggressive hobby, right? And I've wanted to bring. I'm like always debating like, I'd love to start doing underwater photography. Like I really enjoy the pictures when I see it. Like when I'm in the water, I can just like picture, kind of like when I'm just walking around on land or something. I'm like, that would be such a great picture if I hadn't only had my camera right now. There's times, so I just have a little GoPro. I've thought about getting the Olympus, the little TG5, kind of the natural progression, start out with that, see how far I can get with it. It's gotten to the point where I feel that when I have my GoPro and I bring it in the water, like all I'm focused on is trying to get stuff done. And I've kind of said it to myself, like, okay, the last dive or the last day of diving, like I'm not bringing anything in the water. This is just for me and my memories. And that's definitely helped me out a ton, because it's funny how quickly the time can go by, or what you miss when you're just focused on this little tiny screen in front of you. I'm obviously talking about the GoPro. Focused on this little tiny screen, and then you just all this other stuff's going on, and then you come up and everyone's like, did you see that? Did you see that? And I'm like, no. Like I just was focused on my little screen. But no, I mean that's amazing though that you caught that, because some people would probably have just continued on and not, I mean, like, I got to get back in the water to get that shot, and the fact that you're able to, like, I need to take a step back and actually enjoy this sport for what it is. But then you can still obviously go and capture moments in the future, right?
I can. And maybe it's also easier to come to that acknowledgement because I have a lot in the bag already. So I can let my greed go a bit because I have been so privileged. So I would never judge anyone who is super focused on their photos and that is their passion and that is their priority of the dive. That's fine. I have dives like that myself, like where that is the objective, where we are going. Obviously, I have that a lot, actually. Dives where objective is to document what we're doing on the dive. And I also do it for a lot of organizations. So the photos become super important because I am the one who's there to document. So it's all good, however you do it. I think the most important thing you can do as a photographer is that your dive buddies are accepting the situation or are willing to be like a passive buddy that is there to warn you, and also a dive buddy that knows that your awareness is somewhere else. So if they have a problem, they better come to you. Maybe there are photographers who are better than that, but that's my level.
So coming from Egypt, going to Denmark, obviously the conditions I'm sure were vastly different. How did you take? I'm assuming Denmark would be pretty cold water diving. How was that transition? And I haven't been to Egypt. I'm just assuming again that you're going from like a warm water destination going into now a cold water destination that had to have brought on some of its own challenges, I'm sure.
Absolutely. And just to brag a bit, it was Egypt, Mexico, Philippines, Egypt, then Denmark.
Oh, okay.
So I had like a few years of tropical warm water, lovely diving. And then I come to Denmark and I come back during winter. I had never done a dive in Denmark. I'd never done a dry suit dive in my life either. And I was a pretty experienced diver at this time. I had almost 1,000 dives and this was a challenge. So imagine if I had to learn to dive here in Denmark. I don't know how people do it. Well, I've taught now open water courses here. I know it's possible, but you just have to be a lot more talented than what I am. Yeah, it was difficult, and having been working in larger dive operations, you're part of a big community, and there's always good advice that is dealt out to you. I was back here with my boyfriend at the time, and we just had each other. The network I had from Denmark from when I left, they were all non-divers, so it was a lot of using the internet to figure things out, and we went through a few wrong gear choices and a lot of bad navigation as well, because now all of a sudden you can't see anything. We were super good at navigating, natural navigation and reading currents and stuff. Now you're diving in a soup, like in a blended soup. So, yeah. But then slowly you get into a dive community here as well, and you get things straightened out, and it's fine. I mean, I had, dry suit diving for a long time. In the community, everyone as well said, it's dry suit diving, but like, yeah. So when you're joking, we say it's dry suit diving, but it's only dry sometimes. It's
Yes, I know that all too well.
yeah, but actually, I must say, dry suit diving for me today is dry. It has been for quite some time, but that's also a little bit trial and error, and one size doesn't fit all, and we all have different preferences, and there's all of a sudden a lot more to take into account when picking out your gear. But because I had all those dives and that big love for the ocean, I wasn't going to quit. I definitely understand why some people quit with the difficulties that is presented with this type of diving. But then I'm from Denmark, and I dive a lot in Sweden, and those are the Vikings, yeah. I know Danes say we are the Vikings, but I have no idea how they get through their courses. And also, I don't hear them complaining as I'm just doing right now. They are hardcore, because they start their courses with minus degrees and snow and wind and I don't know, and they love it from the first dive. I just loved it. Like, what? How? I knew I wanted to become a diver. What? But why?
So when I used to teach I haven't actively taught in a while now, and I really need to get back to it. But when I used to teach in Austin, Texas, we had a big lake there, and it is very warm. So that's what, one nice thing that you have going for you. Well, there's a lot of nice things, but it's very warm. But visibility can be absolutely horrible sometimes. Like you're saying, just pea soup, and I would always tell students, if you can enjoy it here, anywhere you go in the world, you're going to love it. You're
Yeah.
going to absolutely love it if you have a good time here, because it only gets better. And it becomes it's a great place to train. It was a big, deep lake, so it's a great place to train. It's a great place to hone your skills, get comfortable in lower visibility. Obviously, you don't have the other challenges of open ocean currents and things bigger than you. But it was just a great place to start out and even continue. And then kind of like what you're saying about community, it really makes the dive scene there because there's such a thriving community. You end up building these friendships over time, and people that I've still talked to. I haven't lived back there in 2 years, and I still talk to people back there, and just that community aspect of it is such a huge thing. I was even joking around on my last trip. Well, not even joking around. I was talking to somebody about it and saying, like, the time spent in the water is so small compared to the time gearing up and the time afterwards. And they used to do a dive day, or they still do on Wednesdays, and we'd always joke around like, oh, they're just they meet for the diving, but they really come to, like, for the restaurants, to wherever they're gonna go eat and just hang out. It's like, oh, let's all just go hang out, and 40 minutes, 50 minutes of diving, and then another 3 hours of just hanging out with your friends. So that's awesome that you're able to find the community and incorporate that into, because that really is what makes it, because nobody wants to go out and pea soup. It's not a fun time.
Yeah. Well, today I do, because I have found this different scope for diving. My objective is to actually tell those stories, and so today it's a little bit different. I'm quite motivated to go diving, especially because I've gotten addicted. It's part of my mental health that I get in the water now and then. I really feel it if it's been a while. So I'll do any dive just to be, surrounded by water and to have that tiny fish or whatever living is left there to come up and say hi. I mean, I live a little bit north of the capital of Denmark. Even though it's a capital, it's a very small city, but everything here is cultivated. And underwater, there is still a little bit of wild nature there, and I need that.
And then I wanted to get back to the underwater ambassador. So trying to get this message out, what do you think some of, I don't want to say challenges, but, when you're trying to get that message out, do you find it challenging at times to kind of reach non-divers, to get them aware of these things that you're doing, even though you're nowhere near the water, like a one-use plastic, or, not spilling this oil, because a lot of it will come back to the waterways. So do you find it challenging sometimes, or how do you go about getting that message to non-divers? And I think pictures and photography is an amazing way.
It's a forever challenge, absolutely, to figure out what works, what hits the right spots, what level of emotion can I put into the message, how angry, because I'm often quite angry, how, I cannot let that anger, I can't put that ahead of the message or put it on other people. And that's really, really difficult not to do. And I think if others would analyze my work, they would say you're quite often too much. But it's hard to see at yourself, because I feel like what I do is I take down the volume of my emotions as much as I can and still try to explain how important it is. But it's really, really hard to convey a message of importance and passion and then turn it down a notch, right? So I'm trying to find that balance all the time. And I see as well, in the beginning, my social media and my messages were only through photos of what I saw and consumer goods that you can use as alternatives instead of those that end up as wasting our oceans and stuff. But that was not enough for people. They also needed me, so I need to put myself there. And sometimes, they need to see just Helene in a dry suit, or they need to see me, just, hey, I'm going diving today. So I needed to put myself in there. And then when I do that, I need to always be smiling, and I need to always be happy-go-lucky. And that is a little bit the problem with using the platforms that I'm using, social media, is that there's a little bit of a difference between what you really want to say and how you really want to feel, and what you can then actually put out there in order to get the message through. It's at least my experience. Sometimes I don't hold back, because I can also sometimes need the feedback to be with a little bit of love and care towards me. That, okay, thank you for what you're doing. We know it's tough. I sometimes need that feedback, but often I want to be people's feedback, or how you can say it. So that is a challenge, and I think about it a lot, and I haven't found the right key yet. But also it's moving because I'm not the only one pushing. There is a lot of people like me pushing, and that just spreads, and the awareness is spreading hugely as well. Even from when I started, I feel the awareness is spreading, and it's much, much easier to start a conversation today, because you don't need to start with why is the ocean important. People sort of now get that. So yeah, it's an interesting field to work in. It's challenging. But one thing I do now and then that somehow always works is that I do school presentations. When you talk to kids, it's just so much easier, because they are much, much smarter than us. Like, you say to kids, you know what, kids? We are killing whales. Why? Why are we killing whales? They are absolutely right. They are so smart. We as adults wouldn't be discussing why. We would be discussing, we need to kill some, so how many? How do we do it? How many can we take?
Like for me too, my biggest thing with the podcast is to share everyone's story, right? And then there's so many divers around the world, and I'm like, I just, want to bring you on, share your story. I always bring it back to, it's just kind of like when you're on the dive boat for the first time, or you show up to the dive shop and then you meet other people that have the same passion as you, and the conversations just start flowing. And that's something I try to capture, but then it's like, okay, now I'm starting to have this little bit of a platform. Let's, try to push a message out, or put a message out that, will create positivity, create change. And it's not easy. It's definitely not easy. And kind of like you're saying, like, most people know that the ocean is important. They have this knowledge of it, but when it comes to actually creating change in their daily life, which might not be much, it might be so small, but it would create this big change. But in a world where we're just looking for instant feedback, instant confirmation, whatever you want to call it, that, I got 500 likes, or which I still have never reached, so I don't know why I'm saying that. But the instant satisfaction, and it's like, okay, by me not using this plastic bag, me not using this straw, you're not seeing anything from it, so it doesn't feel like, so it's so hard to, it's like people know, but then to actually implement that change is so easy, but then to create longevity in that change it's so difficult. And it is, and I think that there's more people, and that's why it's the social media really is the double-edged sword, right? It's on each end of the spectrum. It goes so far this way, so far that way. Look, I'm doing the thing with my hands now too. It goes all over the place. But, on one end, we can get messages out there. We've seen things go viral, and we've seen things make a change. And then on the other end, it could just be like the bane of society. I don't know if that's the correct term, but so it's so hard to try to find that right avenue. So if you ever find the key, please let me know.
Okay.
Schools, I think, is such a great idea, because you plant a few of those seeds, and that could create longevity. They're going home and saying, hey, we need to stop doing this, or we need to stop doing that, and then they start incorporating that as they grow up. I mean, that's huge for sure.
I like it a lot. I just don't do all of this for the ocean. It's also to give my own life meaning, right? And I mean, whenever we do good, we also do a little bit that suits ourselves, right? So Just have to be honest about that.
Becoming an underwater ambassador, how can someone help or become an underwater ambassador?
Yeah, I mean, this podcast is mostly listened to by divers, I think. So what I ask myself is, how can I start making my dives useful? I'm not just there to watch and get great memories. I'm a tool when I'm underwater. So how can you become a tool underwater? If you have a camera, start photographing the bad things as well. If you don't have a camera, if you're just a diver, there's always pick up trash. I know by picking up trash underwater, you are not necessarily, relieving the water from massive amounts, but it does teach you a little bit about your own habits, because you're not picking up somebody else's trash, you're picking up our trash. It's something we all created, and often that trash tells you a story about some of the habits you have in your own daily life. So it will actually tell you something about yourself, but it will also be an inspiration to others. In Denmark, we are quite fortunate that there is an NGO that I also photograph for that does projects where you can come as a volunteer. You can be part of big days where we really clean up a full harbor. We also transplant eelgrass, so you can come and participate in days like those. So if there's anywhere in your area where there are organizations where you can volunteer, try it out. Just give it a try, because that's also community and good talks and a good chat and a nice lunch and a coffee and all of that that I think is so important in the dive environment. And lastly, talk about it. Talk about it with the people around you, create those waves. You can't always be a tool on every dive, and I understand as well people go on dive holiday. Instead of counting all you saw and how great this was and in my logbook, start looking at what's maybe missing. Start understanding, what would this have looked like if it wasn't for us. Learn those mechanisms, understand those mechanisms.
It's funny, I didn't think of it, but that was going to be kind of my last question, is what everyone can do to help. But I always like to try to end on some sort of advice question, and that is absolutely amazing advice, and I love it. But my last question I will throw out for you before I let you go is, somebody who has done a lot of tropical warm water dives, now they're about to move to a cold water environment, someone that has made that transition, what is the best piece of advice that you can give that person going into that transition, going from warm water, now they're going into really cold water diving? What's the best piece of advice that you could give? Heated undergarments.
No, yeah, that comes with time, but that's absolutely not the first thing, because in the beginning, short dives will do. I think it's a really, really difficult question to pinpoint one thing out. I think community is important. Find the right people to get advice from. I've been part of several communities, and some are super good logistically, some are super good with equipment, some are super good when it comes to safety and body diving, communications underwater and stuff. So be a little bit critical, just like when you pick a dive center, be a little bit critical about who you're now going to take advice from, because you'll need somebody along that journey, somebody to spar with. But if it should be something more dive related, I said, just don't think. Yeah, I want to say one thing that is a little bit controversial, because a lot of Danes dive in wetsuits. Don't do that. Dive in a dry suit. I'm going to Egypt in January and I'm bringing my dry suit. Dry suit diving, it's warmer, and it's safer. So just don't postpone the dry suit. Also, I would say, so 14 degrees, 17 degrees, that's still cold water. It's 20 degrees. Anything below 20, it's cold.
I'll be honest with you, anything below 25 is cold for me.
Yes.
That's how much I love warm water. I want that nice warm water diving. No, that's absolutely great advice, and I don't think I've been diving dry for quite a while now, and I still dive in a wetsuit in warm water destinations. I just went on a trip, and usually when I'm doing I feel like I might have transitioned to, if I'm starting to do into the technical diving, I know there's many sides of the argument there, but I do prefer a dry suit. But no, I definitely agree with you. If that would be extremely cold, I don't know if I'd be able to handle those temperatures in a wetsuit. I don't know if I would do it. Maybe as a dare.
Yeah, something like. But the thing is as well, you can get used to so many conditions, and that's why they can keep on diving in wetsuits. For instance, some of the divers that do it here in Denmark is because they work around it to make it work. And I know a dry suit is also a big investment, but a lot of divers also buy a dry suit and end up not using it. So I wouldn't be worried about getting a second-hand dry suit for starters, just to see if it's for you, even to dive in cold, murky water. But the point is, just because you get used to the cold, if you need to respond to a situation, or if you're trapped underwater for longer than anticipated, can you actually respond when you have hypothermia? That's the thing, right? You might think you're clear in your head, but your body is already in emergency mode just from the cold. And now you have an actual emergency on top of that.
Helen, I absolutely appreciate you coming on to the podcast today. It's been absolutely wonderful to hear about your journey and the work that you're doing. I hope you had a great time. I look forward to seeing more of the stuff, more of your photography, all the stuff that you will be doing in the future. So thank you very much for coming on to the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Offgassing, a scuba podcast.